Are the top stories this hour. At least 36 killed as tropical storm batters southern Brazil. 17 killed after attack on markets in eastern Ukraine. Plus, death toll rises to 14 after severe storms in Greece, Turkey, Bulgaria. Welcome to the World News on VOP TV. I am Kayla Abraham. Now, the death toll from heavy rains in southern Brazil has risen to 36 as a tropical cyclone battered and soaked the region, flooding homes and swelling rivers. Videos obtained by reporters showed rising waters flooding streets and rivers and submerging houses in the small town of Mucum in Rio Grande do Sul state. Nearby cities such as Lajeado and Rocasales were also hit severely. It was reported that Domingues Fontana, a 74-year-old sawmill worker who escaped the Mucum flooding, stated that nothing could be salvaged. Rain stopped on Tuesday, but weather forecaster Climatempo forecast more on Wednesday and Thursday before showers dissipate by Sunday, with the state still on alert for floods. The Rio Grande do Sul floods are just the latest recent natural disasters in Brazil. More than 50 people were killed in Sao Paulo state this year after massive downpours caused landslides and flooding. The colonial-era city of Petrópolis near Rio de Janeiro and Bahia state has suffered similar disasters, as well as Santa Catarina, a state neighboring Rio Grande do Sul, where an additional victim was confirmed on Tuesday. Well, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva stated that he had spoken to Rio Grande do Sul Governor Eduardo Leite to offer the federal government full support. Lula sent 2 ministers to oversee search and rescue efforts and stated that Vice President Geraldo Alckmin will also be on standby to travel to the hard-hit Rio Grande do Sul state, home to about 11 million people. Now, President Volodymyr Zelensky has condemned a deliberate attack on Ukraine's peaceful city of Kostiantynivka. At least 17 people, including a child, were killed in the blast, which took place on a busy market street in the middle of the day. Kostiantynivka in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region is near the front line. Videos on social media show a bright orange explosion at the far end of the street where people were out shopping. Russia is yet to comment on the attack. Well, Zelensky, who has blamed Moscow, said those killed were people who did nothing wrong and warned the death toll could increase. He stated that dealing with Russia meant turning a blind eye to the audacity of evil. At least 33 people are thought to be injured. A market, pharmacy, and shops are all reported to have been hit, resulting in a now contained fire. It was one of the worst attacks on Ukrainian civilians since the spring and took place in a busy street at around midday as people flocked to market stalls and cafe terraces. Ukraine's Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko stated a few hours later that the search and rescue operation had been completed. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones were downed near Moscow, the southern Rostov region, and the southwestern Bryansk region in the early hours of Thursday. According to state news, 3 buildings were damaged in the city of Rostov-on-Don, and 1 person was injured when one of the drones crashed in the downtown area. Another drone in the Rostov region fell outside the city. It was reported that in Bryansk, debris from one of the 2 destroyed drones shattered windows in a railway station building and damaged cars nearby. According to Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin, in the Moscow region, a drone was downed over the town of Ramenskoye, southeast of the Russian capital. Russian-appointed Governor Yevgeny Balitsky stated that several drones also struck a residential building in Ennahora, a city in the Russian-controlled part of Ukraine's southern Zaporizhzhia region, which is home to Europe's biggest nuclear power plant, adding that no one was wounded. Still, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Kiev on Wednesday in a gesture of support as Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russian forces grinds into its 4th month with only small gains. A senior State Department official told reporters on the trip that during his 2-day visit, Blinken is likely to announce a new package of U.S. assistance worth more than $1 billion. An official stated that Blinken, on the first trip to Kiev by a top official top U.S. officials since the Ukrainian counteroffensive began, is expected to meet President Volodymyr Zelensky and Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, among other senior officials as well as civil society figures. Several hours before his arrival, Russia carried out airstrikes on Kiev and the southern region of Odessa. Ukrainian officials disclosed that no casualties were reported in the capital, but a civilian was killed and port infrastructure was damaged in the south. Now, the death toll from severe storms that have lashed parts of Greece, Turkey and Bulgaria has risen to 14 after rescue teams in the three neighboring countries recovered more bodies. A flash flood at a campsite in the northwestern Turkey near the border with Bulgaria killed at least 5 people and swept away bungalow homes. Rescuers were still searching for one person reported missing. Now, Japan has launched a rocket carrying its lunar exploration spacecraft as the country looks to become the world's 5th to land on the moon. The Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency stated that a homegrown HII-8 rocket took off from Tanegashima Space Center in southern Japan on Thursday and successfully released a smart lander for investigating moon. Unfavorable weather led to 3 postponements in a week last month. Dubbed the Moon Sniper, Japan aims to land slim with 100 meters of its target site on the lunar surface. That is much less than the usual range of several kilometers. The $100 million mission is expected to reach the moon by February next year. Only 4 nations have successfully landed on the moon, which is the United States, Russia, China, and India. India landed its spacecraft last month near the moon's unexplored South Pole in a historic triumph for its low-cost space program. Now, with the selection of former Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum as the candidate of the country's ruling party in next June's election, Mexico will for the first time have 2 women from its main political movement competing for the presidency. Sheinbaum, as well as the opposition candidate Xochitl Galvez, insisted that Mexico is ready to be led by a woman, but it will not be an easy path. On Wednesday night, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's Morena party announced that Sheinbaum had defeated 5 internal party rivals that are all men. López Obrador has put women in more important positions in his cabinet and been a mentor for Sheinbaum, even while being accused at times of male chauvinism. Sheinbaum represents continuation of López Obrador's social agenda, but without his charisma to take on an opponent in Galvez, who has an ease of connecting with people that is more reminiscent of the outgoing president. The independent Galvez is representing the Broad Front for Mexico, a coalition of Conservative National Action Party, the Small Progressive Democratic Revolution Party, and the Old Guard Institutional Revolutionary Party that held Mexico's presidency without interruption between 1929 and 2000. Galvez caucuses with the National Action Party in the Senate, but is not a member. Strategist Antonio Sola, who worked on the 2006 campaign of former President Felipe Calderón and later with one of the parties that helped López Obrador win, thinks Galvez's outside image could help her. Mexico still has famous intense machismo or male chauvinism, expressed in its most extreme form in a high rate of femicides, but also daily in hundreds of more subtle ways. Director of Voice and Vote electoral magazine Gloria Alzose Olmos stated that Mexico has a strong macho vote, adding that it is not exclusive to male voters. She also noted that in June's gubernatorial election in the state of Mexico, the country's most populous jurisdiction, the race was between 2 female candidates. The turnout was the lowest in history. Now, a high-level delegation of Chinese officials led by Vice Premier Louis Guozhong will join celebrations in North Korea to mark the country's 75th founding anniversary this weekend. Pyongyang marks the occasion on September 9 and has indicated it will hold a parade. The visit came on the invitation of North Korea's party and government. It did not specify the events the Chinese officials would attend or whether they would meet leader Kim Jong-un. Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed the trip starting from September 8. Beijing is the most important ally and economic benefactor of North Korea, which is being slowly reopening to the outside world 3 years after closing its borders at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Last month, its first international commercial flight in 3 years landed in Beijing. Now, Australia and China have agreed to expand further cooperation, and Canberra welcomed the ongoing progress in the bilateral relationship with Beijing. In a statement issued following a meeting with China's Premier Li Qiang on the sidelines of ASEAN Association, which is Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit in Jakarta, Indonesia, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese called the meeting a frank and constructive discussion. He also announced that he will visit China later this year at the invitation of President Xi Jinping. Australia and China in recent months moved forward to ease tensions between the two countries following their relations soared after Canberra joined its Western allies in calling for an investigation into the origins of COVID-19, which first appeared in the Chinese city of Wuhan in 2019. Later, China imposed tariffs of over 200% on Australian wine import following an anti-dumping investigation. However, relations between the two countries apparently saw an improvement after President Xi Jinping and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's high-level meeting in Indonesia last November, followed by respective foreign ministers in Beijing. In response, Chinese Premier Li Qiang also said that China is ready to work with Australia to restart and resume bilateral exchanges in various fields. During his first meeting with Albanese, Li stated that a sound and stable China-Australia relationship serves the fundamental interest and common aspiration of the two sides. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Thursday has announced a decision to open an Indian embassy in Timor-Leste. Modi announced the decision while co-chairing the annual ASEAN-India Summit in the Indonesian capital. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced a decision to open an Indian embassy in Timor-Leste. The Ministry of External Affairs stated that the ASEAN-India Summit, the Prime Minister announced the decision to establish an Indian embassy in Dili, Timor-Leste. The MEA disclosed that the decision was warmly welcomed by Timor-Leste and ASEAN members nation. Timor-Leste joined the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in 2022 as an observer before becoming its full member. ASEAN is considered one of the most influential groupings in the region, and India and several other countries, including the US, China, Japan, and Australia, are its dialogue partners. While China has stated that 90 countries have confirmed attendance for its Belt and Road Initiative conference being held in October, the Foreign Ministry has previously stated that the third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation will be held in Beijing in October, with 2023 marking the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. State media reported that several foreign leaders expected to attend, including Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić and Argentine President Alberto Fernandez. According to Russia's state news, Russian President Vladimir Putin also has a scheduled visit to China in October when the country hosts the One Belt, One Road Forum. China's foreign ministry says that the country has signed Belt and Road Cooperation document with more than 150 countries and over 30 international organizations. Critics see the ambitious Belt and Road Initiative billed as recreating the Asian Silk Road to boost global trade infrastructure as a tool for President Xi Jinping's China to spread its geopolitical and economic influence. Now, Indian Prime Minister, who is hosting the G20 summit, has made it a priority to grant the African Union full membership. Giorgia Meloni of Italy was also among those advocating the AU's G20 membership at the last Group of 7 meeting, which took place in Japan in mid-May. In early May, during a visit to the African Union headquarters in Ethiopia, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz threw his weight behind calls for the bloc to become a permanent G20 member to give it more say in efforts to tackle global issues like climate change. Scholz argued that Africa must play a greater international role to reflect its growing importance in an increasingly fractured and multipolar world order. The European Union is keen to take some credit for the G20 step. Leaders from the bloc plan to hold a high-level meeting with African leaders on the sidelines of the summit, which is being skipped by Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Group of 20 nations agreed to grant the African Union permanent membership status, according to the people familiar with the matter, who said that leaders expected to announce the decision during a summit in India this weekend. The move would give the 55-member African Union, which is currently classified as an invited international organization, the same status as the EU. It's part of a drive to provide African countries with a stronger voice on global issues such as climate change and emerging market debt, particularly as emerging markets in the so-called global station take on a more prominent role in world affairs. In early May, during a visit to the African Union headquarters in Ethiopia, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz threw his weight. The European Union is keen to take some credit for the G20 step. Now, elsewhere, police in Zanzibar have arrested the wife of a former president on 3 charges, including theft of a motor vehicle, which she denies. Esther Lungu, who is currently in detention in the capital Lusaka, has been arrested along with 3 others. Police spokesman Danny Mwale confirmed in a statement that the quartet had also been charged with 1 count of theft of a certificate of title for a property in Lusaka. They are also accused of being in possession of property believed to be the proceeds of crime. Several former ministers, government officials, and Lungu family members are currently under investigation for suspected criminal activities. They have all denied any wrongdoing. Now, African leaders have proposed a global carbon tax regime in a joint declaration. The Nairobi Declaration capped the 3-day Africa Climate Summit in Kenya's capital. The document, which was released on Wednesday, demanded that major polluters commit more resources to help poorer nations. The leaders stated they will use it as the basis of their negotiating position at November's COP28 summit. The African Climate Summit was dominated by discussions on how to mobilize financing to adapt to increasingly extreme weather, conserve natural resources, and develop renewable energy. Africa is among the most vulnerable continents to the impact of climate change, but according to researchers, it only receives about 12% of the nearly $300 billion in annual financing it needs to cope. The Nairobi Declaration urged world leaders to rally behind the proposal for a global carbon taxation regime, including a carbon tax on fossil fuel trade, maritime transport, and aviation that may also be augmented by a global financial transaction tax. It stated that such measures would ensure large-scale financing for climate-related investments and insulate the issue of tax rises from geopolitical and domestic political pressures. Around 24 countries currently impose taxes on carbon, but the idea of a global carbon tax regime has failed to gain much traction. On Tuesday, Kenya's President William Ruto referred to past proposals in the European Union for a financial transaction tax. Conservation groups in 2011 stated that money raised from the tax should finance environmental priorities, but the European Commission's proposal never won the unanimous approval required for the European Council to become a law. Now, Nigeria's Presidential Election Tribunal has ejected challenges by opposition rivals to Bola Tinubu's win in February's disputed vote following a pattern seen in previous elections years in Africa's most populous country. No legal challenge to the outcome of a presidential election has succeeded in Nigeria, which returned to democracy in 1999 after 3 decades of almost uninterrupted military rule and has a history of electoral fraud. Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party and Peter Obi of the Labour Party, who came 2nd and 3rd respectively, had asked the court to cancel the election, alleging irregularities. Justices of the 5-member tribunal, taking turns to read out judgments for more than 11 hours, rejected Atiku and Obi's individual petitions point by point. Judge Haruna Samani said Obi's position was unmeritorious and had not led any credible evidence sufficient enough to back claims of irregularity. Samani said Atiku's allegations of vote fraud and were so lame and dismissed his argument that Tinubu was not qualified to run for president. Obi and Atiku, who were not in court, could not be immediately reached for comment. Obi's Labour Party in a statement rejected the judgment and stated that it would announce its next steps after a meeting with its lawyers. And now says soldiers have gone on trial in the Democratic Republic of Congo in connection with the killing of more than 40 anti-UN protesters last week. Amongst them are two senior officers alleged to have instructed soldiers to open fire on the banned demonstration. The protest took place in the eastern city of Goma to demand the withdrawal of UN and regional peacekeepers. Protesters accused them of failing to protect civilians against decades of attacks by rebels in the east. The case is being held at a military tribunal in Goma, the capital of mineral-rich North Kivu province, where many rebel groups operate and where M23 fighters captured large swathes of territory last year. The soldiers were charged with crimes against humanity and of violating others. One of the 6 defendants, Colonel Mike Mikombe, heads of the elite Republican Guard in Goma. He was the only one of the accused who spoke to deny the charges at the start of the proceedings on Tuesday. It is unclear whether the defendants themselves fired any shots during the last Wednesday's protest. A religious sect had organized the demonstration, which the authorities had banned. The UN peacekeeping mission in Eastern Congo has faced several protests since last year. MONUSCO currently has almost 18,000 personnel in the country, including more than 12,000 soldiers. It has been agreed that the force will withdraw from the elections in December. The government's most recent updates on the anti-UN protest in Goma put the death toll at 43, which includes a police officer who was allegedly killed by protesters. 53 people were reported to have been injured. However, the UN Human Rights Office stated that the death toll could be higher, and military prosecutor Colonel Michel Kachil told the tribunal that 56 people had been killed. More than 150 people were also arrested during the crackdown by the security forces. The incident has sparked outrage across Congo, and Human Rights Watch has called the soldiers' response callous and unlawful. The military tribunal comes after the country's interior and defense ministers traveled to Goma over the weekend to investigate the incident. Now, an Ethiopian opposition group has accused government forces of killing dozens of civilians in the restive Amhara region, where fighting between local militias and the army continues to be reported. The reporter stated that the Anat Party said 29 civilians, including children and the elderly, were killed near their homes by government troops in a small town called Majete. At least 20 civilians were killed in drone strikes in 2 other areas in the region. Although the Ethiopian media outlet has not been able to independently confirm the claims, and there has not been any response to the accusations from the government. Violence broke out in Amhara after months of simmering tensions over a controversial decision to disband a paramilitary regional force. In early August, local militias entered most of the region's major cities and briefly controlled an airport. Urban combats claimed several lives, and a large number of prisoners were freed. Relative normalcy appears to have returned to the cities after government troops pushed the militias out. Last week, the army's head Field Marshal Berhanu Jula declared armed groups operating in the region were no longer a threat. However, fighting continues to be reported this week in or around several small towns and villages. An ongoing internet shutdown has made it difficult to get information about the exact magnitude of the fighting. Now, the United States has targeted a top Sudanese paramilitary official in the highest profile use of sanctions since the current conflict began in Sudan. Washington has sanctioned Abdurrahim Dagalo, a Rapid Support Forces deputy leader, over human rights abuses during the group's clashes with Sudan's army. The move, announced on Wednesday, is an apparent response to the deadly violence seen recently in West Darfur, which the RSF is accused of perpetrating along with allied militias. Dagalo has been accused by the U.S. of being connected to abuses such as conflict-related sexual violence and killings based on ethnicity. The RSF has allegations by conflict monitors, rights groups, and witnesses that it is behind the violence in Darfur. Abdulrahim Dagalo, brother of RSF Commander Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemti, is the first official on either side to be sanctioned since the start of the war. Previous sanctions levied on companies targeted the army as well as the RSF. Meanwhile, Sudan's government has encouraged airlines to resume flights to Sudan after Egypt Air became the first commercial flight to enter or leave Sudan since its descent into conflict in April. The Egypt Air flight carried more than 100 passengers from Egypt's capital Cairo to the eastern Sudan city of Port Sudan on Tuesday morning and returned to Egypt in the afternoon. Red Sea State Governor Fatala Haj Ahmed told media that the flight by Egypt Air signaled that Sudan was safe and stable for international flights. Sudan closed its airspace in April this year after a power struggle between the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group escalated into conflict. On 15 August, the Sudan Civil Aviation Authority announced that it had reopened airspace in the eastern part of the country. Egypt's Consul General to Sudan, Sameh Farouk, stated that Egypt Air will operate a weekly return flight between Egypt and Sudan. Now, Gabon's military leaders have announced an end to deposed President House arrest, saying he is now free to move about. In a communique read on the national television on Wednesday evening, military spokesperson Colonel Orurich Manforbi stated that the decision to free Bongo was due to his state of health. The military leader also added that the deposed president may, if he wishes, travel abroad for medical checkups. After the military staged a coup on 30 August, they placed the former president under house arrest and announced they were in control of the oil-rich country. The decision to free him follows pressure from the Central African Regional Bloc, ECAS, and Gabon's neighbors to respect the physical integrity of the ousted head of state. In 2018, Bongo suffered a stroke. His health was a major source of concern for many in the build-up to the 2023 presidential election. Now, Madagascar president has said he will be seeking re-election in November, despite a campaign to disqualify him from the presidential race. In June this year, leaked documents revealed that Andry Rajoelina, his wife, and children had become naturalized French citizens in 2014. Since the revelation, some Magaussi leaders and citizens have questioned his transparency and loyalty to Madagascar, which was a French colony until 1960. Critics also say the country's law does not allow dual citizenship, and those who obtain foreign citizenship automatically forfeit their Magaussi citizenship and cannot seek the presidency. But Rajoelina, who won the election in late 2018, disputes this and says the constitution does not forbid those with dual citizenship from vying for presidency. More than 20 candidates are running in the elections scheduled for 9 November on the Indian Ocean island. And that is on the world news. VOP Business Show is coming up next. I am Kayla Abraham. Thanks for watching.